This is part 9 of my testimony, um, which is very long because it took me a very long time to come to Jesus in a way that was complete enough for it to stick. And I think a lot of people are coming to Jesus in a way that doesn't stick these days. So maybe this will help some people. Who knows? But it's a very long testimony because I've had a pretty long life, and I've just been back with Jesus for about 12 years now. And my memory has always been very good, my long-term memory, but it's not as good anymore. And I do have to keep kind of going back and forth a little bit in time as I remember things that happened that I wanted to share with you, and especially some of the supernatural things. And so, anyway, I would like to repeat this Bible verse that inspired me to do this testimony. It's from Revelation 10 through 12, verses 10 through 12. And it's about the end times, which surely we are in or will be in very soon. Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe unto the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And for anyone not familiar, when it speaks about the blood of the Lamb, that's an interesting term, because it's one of the ways that the Old Testament kind of explains some of the New Testament, and vice versa, because in the Old Testament of the Bible is before Jesus came as Jesus the Messiah, and that was when people would give animal sacrifices for their sins. I think it was just once a year, and there were only certain people. Moses got it set up under God's orders back a long time ago, and only certain people of a certain bloodline were allowed to be the high priests that would do this once a year. And they used to have something called the Ark of the Covenant, which was very carefully managed, and there was a little bit of God the Spirit in that. And so it was a very, the places they used as tabernacles, or I think they were called tabernacles at first, and then they were basically well, it was a special place, only priests could go in there. Let me just say that. And they would sacrifice animals to cleanse us of our sins. And I believe this is partly the way of God showing us that, look, the life is in the blood. And this is why the blood has to be sacrificed. And I'm not going to go into explaining all of that, because you don't really need to understand that so much now, except when you're reading the Old Testament. And then when Jesus came, he was God in the flesh. And God has three aspects: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the Son is the one who came in the flesh, and he's also the one who is called the Word, and he's synonymous with the Word of God, which is the Holy Bible, or any true scriptures. I think the book of Enoch might be included in that, the first book of Enoch only. And anyway, when Jesus came, the people of Israel had already gotten so off base. They were following a lot of their own rules that the rabbis started saying, oh, we have this oral tradition and we're going to write this down, and that wasn't what Moses wrote down. And then they started making new laws and new rules, and it's a big mess. It was really a lot of stuff actually is not from God. And so when Jesus came, he came to really change things and sacrifice his own blood, which is the blood of God. He sacrificed it for us so that we could have our sins cleansed in such a way that we could actually become who we were meant to be, because God made us in the image of God, and yet we have free will, and nobody is going to be forced into the kingdom of heaven. People have to choose it. We have to choose it. And I guess the devil comes in handy in that way, because he's always trying real hard to get us not to choose God, because he hates us so much. And anyway, I've always had trouble giving my testimony because I didn't come back to Jesus the third and the most real stick to it time until I was almost 60. And so it's a lot of stories to tell, and here we go. The last thing I had mentioned in part 8 was being kicked out of the house with Priscilla and Tom, and how I wished, I had been more mature to be more concerned about her and her baby with the spina bifida. I was really taken aback by the situation, and I felt really bad for her, but I don't feel like I did anything to really nurture her in any way. And the fact that she thought I was having an affair with her husband, that was not true at all. It was far from true. I mean, her husband never even flirted with me, nor vice versa. But I did not defend myself, and that probably, the fact that I never said anything and I just moved out because my friend told me that she was going to throw my stuff out if I didn't leave. I did that because I was really hurt, but also I felt like if I just told her it wasn't true, she wouldn't believe me, so I didn't bother. Anyway, now we're going to go back, skip around a little bit in time, because I started realizing things that I had left out, like when I lived in the ashram of Maraji. There was, I had mentioned that we had vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. And as far as I knew, everybody was following those rules. Except I wasn't being very obedient, but then I didn't have to because of the service I had. And without realizing it, I was being given a little bit of preferential treatment by the person who gave out petty cash. But anyway, what happened was, not long before I moved out of the ashram, Maraji surprised us all. He was 16 years old, by marrying an American woman who was an airline stewardess named Marilyn, spelled with an O instead of an I, M-A-R-O-L-Y-N. Anyway, she was a beautiful woman, taller than him. He's not very tall. It was shocking. It was shocking to us because we just never thought of him as a sexual being. And it turned out he had been secretly dating her and asked her to marry him, and she accepted. And then people he knew personally that were in the sort of elite part of the Divine Light mission. A bunch of them were invited to the wedding and went to the wedding before any of us even knew he was going to get married. And then suddenly one day it was announced he's married, and we were shown a few pictures from the wedding, and it was quite shocking. And it was real interesting, and I couldn't really understand it. I had had no trouble being celibate in the ashram. It just wasn't an issue for me. But maybe for a lot of people they did have trouble with it. I don't know, because suddenly after he got married, people were going to bars and drinking, and they were having sex with each other. And I barely knew about it. A couple people finally told me. I was somebody who didn't really socialize all that much in the ashram. I just did my service, and I think people they just didn't see me as someone to gossip to, I guess. But anyway, because I couldn't understand, I would come home to the ashram I lived in at the time. There was at least 10 people that lived there, and there would be nobody home. Usually the house mother was there, but nobody's there, and I wasn't used to that. Usually there was most of the people were there. I was like, where are they? That was asking that question. That's how I kind of found out what was going on. And that really threw me for a loop, confused me. I thought, oh, I don't understand. Why are these people all going off and having sex now? And so I decided to go meditate, do the knowledge techniques, and hope that would help me in some way. And that particular day, it was very interesting. I actually was in the music technique, and then suddenly I was experiencing light instead. And then the next thing I know, it was kind of like I was a little drop of water in a vast ocean, and it sort of moved, like barely moved. It was just like that, and it was a real sort of nothingness. Other than the light, I could see light, and I could see colors, little rainbow colors sparkling, but nothing was going on. And I was having no thoughts for a certain amount of time. No thoughts at all. I was just there in this ocean of light. And what was the thought I had? I finally had a thought. Oh, I think my thought was something like, where am I? And when I had that thought, it was as if that was a little cork that suddenly started floating up to the top of the ocean. And then when it popped up to the top, I opened my eyes, and I was like, wow. And from everything I had been taught about knowledge and the experiences you're supposed to have and what was considered really a high experience, that seemed to be that I had experienced samadhi or nirvana. That was apparently the place we were supposed to go. And that was kind of exciting to get there, but it was a real nothing burger, I have to tell you. It was a nothing burger. Anyhow, I just wanted to mention that, and there was one other, let's see. I have a couple note cards here so I don't forget what I was remembering to mention. Oh yeah, I had a couple other experiences that were kind of seemed supernatural or in the ashram. And another one was maybe a year or less before that last experience that I just mentioned, where I went, and it was a rare time that I went into the meditation room, and and meditated for a pretty long time, and went into something, and it was very weird because what it felt like was a body orgasm. I haven't experienced a full body orgasm in my life except maybe 2 or 3 times ever. But I had experienced that, so I did know what that felt like. And that's what it felt like. And that's really about all that happened. It was very odd. It seemed very sexual. And then, living in that same house, one night I had a dream, but it was one of those that just really shocks you. It just really, like, whoa, it was really a wake-up call to me, because I had been for so many years wanting not to be alive. I just didn't want to be in this world at all. I wanted to leave. And in this dream, I was suddenly pulled, like it was like suddenly death came to get me. And I knew it. I knew I was dying. I was going to die immediately. And an emotion came out of me that I didn't know I had. And that was that I was like, oh no, I want to live. I have so many things to do. And then the dream was over, and I woke up, and I was so glad that I was still alive. But it was a revelation to me that I wanted to live. I was really glad to know that some part of me really wanted to live. And then also something I hadn't mentioned was that when I first moved out of the ashram, I had no high school education, but I had been, I had a 10th grade education basically, and and no GED. And I had some stubborn reason that I was not going to get one. I can't tell you my argument now, but I was very stubborn about it, and it was important to me that I not get a GED. And but I've always been kind of well spoken because both of my parents were college educated, and my biological mother, when I was learning how to talk, and she had incredibly, like, almost perfect diction, and had won speech awards in high school. And my father also was extremely well spoken, and had college degree, and they both were really into using a lot of words in the vocabulary, and even though they were from Texas, they didn't sound like they were. And so that just came naturally from my background of growing up mostly with my father. But it made me seem educated. And back then, most white people didn't drop out of school. So people would just assume you finished high school. And I took advantage of that. So anyhow, when I got out of the ashram, I needed a job, and a friend of mine that had lived in one of the ashrams with me said, oh, do you need a job? Because there's a law firm that I think they'll hire you. They have an opening for a receptionist. And I said, well, I don't even have a high school diploma. I don't know anything about doing any of that. And she said, well, no, you'll be fine because you're a good typist now and everything, and I'll give you a referral. And so I was like, well, okay, sure. And so I did. I got a job as a receptionist at a law firm in downtown Denver. And I was not only answering the phones, but I was also doing the typing for the most junior attorney in the firm. And while I was there, I was doing a lot of typing, a lot of, they were called briefs or pleadings for a particular case that he was working on. And it was something where I think somebody might have been suing an airline company, and he was, and that firm was representing the airline company, something like that. And I would be typing all these interrogatories, which is all these questions that they ask the person. In this case, the defendant was asking the person who was suing them. And it would be pages and pages and a lot of personal questions, and it just seemed really over much. I mean, why would somebody need to know a lot of the questions there? It was very intrusive. I thought a lot of those questions were just over the top. And then there'd be another set of interrogatories, and then another set, and I was like, why are they doing this? This just seemed kind of ridiculous. And so I asked that junior attorney one day, I said, why do they keep asking him all these questions and having these long interrogatories? And he said, that's what they get for suing the airline company. And later I became a legal secretary again. And I came to realize that's a big part of the attitude of a lot of lawyers. It's like they are purposely torturing people with all their pleadings and interrogatories, and I could see pretty early on that justice was bought. Who can afford the attorneys that'll keep going on and on and on, and they charge a lot of money, and well, whatever. I saw a lot of that, and I didn't like it, and I don't remember why I quit that job, but I quit that job, and because I had just been a legal secretary, I think I was there maybe 6 months, I got pretty good jobs through Kelly Girl, which I think they might still be around as Kelly Services, and that was being a temporary secretary at a lot of places, basically, was what it was. I did not do shorthand. And this was still when people were just using typewriters. But I could make, enough pretty decent money doing that. And so, let's see, I have to... Oh, and one of the things I didn't mention is when I had lived with the two roommates, where it ended up being two roommates that were both identifying as homosexual, and they asked me to move out since I was heterosexual. While I was living there, I had a boyfriend who he really did like me a lot, and I knew that, and I knew he wasn't giving me a bad deal, and he sold me a used car, and it was a Lincoln Continental. It was the same year that Elvis had owned one. For some reason, that was considered a big deal, and I was already used to having a big car. That didn't bother me, so I bought it, and I think I paid $400 for it. And that is the way I was able to get around after I moved from there. I was able to drive to Boulder and drive here and drive there. And then there's more I remember that it's just, there's so much stuff I really don't like remembering. It's amazing how my memory will conveniently just skip over a lot of things. But after I left Boulder and it wasn't working out with my friend that's living there, I just drove back to Denver, and I had a friend who, it was a sad story. I had known her in the ashram, and she was a very little girl looking, even though she was in her early 20s, early to mid 20s. She looked like she was 14 or 15. She was very petite, and her body just looked like the body of a little girl, and then her face could easily, go with that little girl thing. In fact, I remember her telling me that she had auditioned for Jesus Christ Superstar, that movie they made, that first one, and the only reason she didn't get the part is they said she just looked too young. It's true, she looked really young. She was, she had moved out of the ashram also and got some kind of job. I think it was working kind of late at night doing some kind of telephone operator or something. And she would take the bus home. And one night she took the bus. She was waiting for the bus at 9 o'clock at night, and she was abducted and taken out to a field and raped and left out in the field. And that's just terrible. And, at the time I was noticing a lot of girls that I knew in Denver, we were all lived in what was called Capitol Hill. It was, I'd say, all within, half a mile to a mile of the state capitol. And at the time, Denver was considered the rape capital of the United States. It had a lot of single people in it and a lot of divorced people. And anyhow, I had another friend who was raped in a grocery store parking lot in the daytime. And then others were people I didn't know very personally, but they lived in the ashram and I knew who they were, that I heard about getting raped, and I was really not wanting to live on Capitol Hill anymore. That reminds me, one story I forgot to mention was when I was living in the publishing ashram, where we always had the door unlocked. I said before I couldn't remember, but now I remember, they did still do those so-called truth meetings every night, or almost every night, in that same house where there was the really big room that you could fit maybe, 60 to 100 people sitting in there on the floor at one time, with a little stage sort of set up in the middle of the side. Well, anyway, one night I went to that. I didn't go to those very often, but one night I went to that, and there was a guy there. He just had really creepy vibes, and he had a great big fro, and it was reddish, and he had freckles. He had a lot of freckles, and he would come around, and I remember he was sitting not far from me, but in front of me, and he got up this one evening, and as he was leaving, he touched me, and he said, "I'll see you later." And that was pretty creepy. But anyway, it turned out, not long after that, another lady that lived in the ashram, who was about my height, was sleeping. I wasn't there at the time. A lot of times when you went to that publishing ashram to go to sleep, you might be the only person there, or just there might only be 2 people. It was, even though there was 10 or 12 people living there. And she woke up with that guy with his hands around her neck trying to strangle her. And fortunately she was strong enough to get him off of her. And then, I think maybe somebody made noise and he got scared and ran away. But from all his description, it was clear that it was that same guy. And so the girls in that ashram, we were afraid to live there anymore. And they allowed me to move over to another ashram just up the street, which was the very first one that had ever opened up there, and where some of the executives of the mission lived. And they also had those little meetings, but just maybe not as often. I don't remember. Anyway, they let me stay there, and they had a room that was usually kept for one of Maharaji's brothers, who people thought was the embodiment of knowledge, or they thought he was just the smartest holy person in the world kind of guy. And he had a bedroom there, but he was almost never came to the United States. And so they let some of the girls sleep in sleeping bags in that bedroom. And he had books, lots of books. And I remember a book I read. I was reading part of it, and it was from the Hindu scriptures. And it was so interesting to me to read about these guys that they told about from ancient times, who were fighting with each other. I don't know what their argument was or anything, but what they would do to get more powerful is that they would fast. And they would fast just so that they could win a fight with each other. But it wasn't anything, like, they weren't like good guys. Nobody was a good guy. And I found that really shocking. Wow, that those ancient dudes were using fasting to get spiritual power. I think that's all I wanted to share about the ashram, except for that I did hear a lot of things. And in fact, this one was totally, it's not even hearsay, because I experienced it myself and I heard her say it myself. And what she was saying was not hearsay, because she was talking about her own experience. And she was talking to a whole big group of us at the Kittredge building. She had been a secretary in the Kittredge building, and then Maharaji had picked her to be his private secretary, and she had moved to California. They were living in Pacific Palisades or Malibu at the time, I don't remember which. And she was telling stories about Maharaji. She was very dedicated to him, and she was in no way putting him down in her mind. And she talked about a time that Maharaji had a what do you call them, those lawnmowers that you sit on and you can ride them and cut the grass. And he had one like that, but for some reason it had room on the sides or in the back that 2 or 3 other people of his followers were able to stand on it or cling to it and ride with him. And she said one day he went and he ran over the feet or some body part, I think it was the feet, some body part of another of his followers that was out in that yard. He just went and shoot right over him. It was like he did the way she told the story, he did it on purpose. And that was horrifying. And then the rest of the story went, and this was supposed to be a great thing. She said then he came back around, and he had somebody bring a first aid kit or something, and then he made sure that he got his first aid and that they put the bandages on his feet. And then he said, see, the perfect master, he used to call himself the perfect master. The perfect master always makes sure that you're taken care of. Something like that. And I couldn't believe she was even telling that story. That sounded so awful. And I also heard stories that were not so given so publicly of how he would do things like lock people. He'd have his followers and guys, and he'd have them all take their clothes off, and then he'd order them to go outside or something, and then he'd lock them out of the house in the winter. Weird stuff. It was just, it was very ungodly stuff. And and we were, of course, taught from the very beginning, you never judge the perfect master. He's God on this earth, so anything he does is okay. You just don't understand if he does something that seems really bad. It's just because you don't understand, but he knows all, and everything he does is good. So these are some of the things that made me start having to question whether I really wanted to follow him anymore. And oh, one other thing I forgot. I've got to mention this because it comes up later in the story in my life. Right after I had received the initiation of knowledge, it was in July 1972. There was a big festival that they had in Montrose, Colorado, which is over kind of the southwest part of the state. Beautiful, beautiful area. And it was an outdoors event, and they had a thing which he only did this mostly early in his times in the United States. He quit doing it after 4 or 5 years. He quit doing it in the United States and kept doing it in India, but not here. And that was that he would have people get in line, and they could come, and I think it was either kiss his feet or just bow to his feet. And I don't really remember which. And anyway, I was in this long line, and they said, and people were talking about it in the line. They said, when you get up to Maharaji and you go down to his feet, put your hand behind your right ear, and that'll be your way of telling him you want him to give you holy breath. And I was like, what's holy breath? I'd never heard of it. And actually, from that time on, I was always asking people what they knew about it. Nobody seemed to know much about it. But anyway, I did that. I gave him the hand signal that I wanted the holy breath. And when he did, and I saw films of him doing this too, and when you did that, he'd go like this. And that meant he did it. And so he did that with me. And this becomes interesting later in my story. Okay, so I mentioned I had the Lincoln Continental, and then my friend that got raped, and she felt that she had to have an abortion because she got pregnant from that. And at the time, I was pro-choice. I didn't think that you were killing somebody if you got an abortion. I didn't think about it very much, and especially with her being raped. And so she took her rent money and used it to get an abortion. And she was living with a couple guys that were followers of Maharaji. And she was not able to give him the rent that month, and she explained that she had been raped and that she had had to use the money for the abortion. And they had no compassion for her and kicked her out. And she had no place to stay. And so I asked my roommates if she could stay for a little while at our apartment. You know, we had a couch, and they wouldn't allow it. And at that point is when I determined that I really wanted to have my own apartment in the future, so that if I wanted to let somebody stay, I could. What ended up happening with her is she ended up getting a job as a stripper, and basically turning into a really hard-hearted person that I wouldn't think was possible with her. I remember her saying to me, I've learned how to get money out of men's pockets. And that was just, I couldn't believe she said that. But that's what it came to for her. Anyway, through her, I met a guy that lived in the same, it was not a gated community. I don't know what you'd call it, but it was some green rolling hills with lots of maybe fourplexes on it all over. I don't, each one seemed like you were in a nice apartment. It's kind of like living in a nice apartment. And there was fountains and things out in the hills and all that. And that's where she lived, and she had met a guy that was married, and she was having an affair with him, which I didn't think was a good idea, but I mean, I wasn't going to put my morals on her. And she ended up letting me know a secret she wasn't supposed to tell, which was that the married man she was having an affair with was some kind of informant, and I don't remember whether it was to the DEA or some other group, but he was working undercover, and she didn't tell me this at first, but what happened was she introduced me to a guy that had another apartment in those rolling hills, and I just was immediately extremely attracted to him. I remember at the time the hit song on the radio that I seemed to hear all the time was called Life in the Fast Lane, and that was really what my life felt like at the time. That was Life in the Fast Lane, and I was still looking for a man to make my life all right. I had totally bought into that Cinderella story, and I was still going for it. Since the meditation thing didn't work out, I was going back to the old plan of finding a man that would complete me or whatever. And so this guy, he was very attractive to me right away, and I soon learned that he was a cocaine dealer, but I didn't let that bother me, and very soon he and I had slept together, and he invited me to live with him, and I did. I moved in, and soon after that he started insisting that I snort cocaine every time he had people over and they were snorting cocaine. I had done it once with him, I think, at that point. I was never into cocaine. And when I snorted, I didn't have the experience most people seem to have. It made my nose a little bit numb, but it didn't make me high. And I knew how expensive it was, so I didn't like snorting it. It's like what a waste of money. But he said I had to do it because these were people who were potential customers that were coming over, and if I didn't do it, they would all think I was a narc, which is what they called people who were narcotics agents. And so I did. Sometimes it might be 2 or 3 times in one day, sometimes at one time, whatever, but seemed pretty often, and I didn't like doing it. And this one time, there was a guy who had stayed in the room with me where people had been snorting cocaine, and he was talking to me about how maybe I had said something how I didn't really feel anything when I snorted the cocaine. Maybe I did. Maybe that's what got him started. But he was saying, oh, it's so good if you get it in a needle. You got to try it at least once. I was like, no, I don't do needles. I won't do needles. And he argued with me. It seemed like 30 minutes. And finally, I went to that old saying that a lot of people in the 60s went to, was that, okay, I'll try anything once. I really didn't want to do it, but he wanted me to do it so badly, and he had a needle and he was going to give me a free shot of cocaine, and I didn't want it, but I let him pressure me into it. And when he did, it, I felt the cocaine. I felt the cocaine a lot, and I found out why people like it so much. It was for not that long. It seemed like less than half an hour. I loved everybody. I loved the whole world. I saw some people in the living room, and I was telling them how much I loved them and making promises that I'd do anything for them. I don't know. I was just talking out of the drug. And then I came down. And I really had liked that experience, but I did not like needles, and I never did that again. Not too long after, I found out that that guy who had stuck me with a needle was they had a name for it. It was an informant. He was somebody who I think had gotten caught with drugs, and the police had got him to a trade-off. He could stay out of jail if he would help them find other people that were selling drugs or something like that. And the reason I found out about that was because of my friend who was now a stripper, because she had been told by her boyfriend. I don't think she told me how she knew, but I found out later that's how she knew. And then I was staying there for a while, and it was not good. It was my relationship with that guy Dale. He was it was all sexual, and he had a hatred of women that was really obvious. He had had bad experiences with women in the past, and sometimes I could tell he was trying to hurt me when we had sex, and I saw how he could easily get so suspicious about things. He was always watching to see if I would cheat on him. I wasn't the cheating type. I was a loose woman, but I was not a cheater. How weird, but true. And anyhow, a point came where that guy that was, let's see, no, nothing had happened yet. And then my friend, the stripper, she wanted to warn me because she felt, what's the word, responsible for my living there, because she was the one who had introduced me to him. And she said, you can't stay there because he's he's going to get busted. And I was like, how do you know? And then she finally told me it was the married man that she was having an affair with. He's the one who told her. And then she explained to me that the way they usually do it is they'll get all their evidence and all of that, and then they'll wait a while so that by the time you get busted, you don't remember you won't be able to figure out who it was that was the DEA agent that came. I figured out who it was. And he was a straight up good guy. One good thing about Dale was he always had me not be part of his tete-a-tetes with people while he was selling drugs. And he had a very, very long living room, and one end of it had couches and the other end of it had a pool table. And he was over at the pool table doing a drug deal, and the guy that I believe was the DEA agent was standing there with me one evening. The one evening he came and he said he was buying drugs for somebody else, and he did not do any drugs. And while he was waiting for Dale to be done with what he was doing at the pool table, he was asking me a lot of questions, and like, do you have a job? And I said, yeah. I told him the kind of work I did and stuff like that. And he seemed kind of fatherly. And um, anyway, when my friend told me that Dale was going to get busted and that an agent had been there, I knew who it was, and I liked that guy. He was straight up. He wasn't cheating on the way he did things. Anyway, I thought I was in love with Dale, and I didn't want him to get busted. But because of saying, I wasn't allowed to say how I knew. And so I just told him, I said, I can't tell you how I know, but I know that you're going to get busted, so you've got to get out of here. I said, I'll even give you my car. You don't have to pay for it, I'll just give you my car and you can go and don't even tell me where you're going. I just really wanted to help him. But he didn't believe me. And then, sometime around that same time, the guy who had stuck the needle in me was telling Dale lies about me and saying that I had oral sex with him, and he was not saying it in such a nice way. Not that that's even nice, but it's more graphic than I wanted to be. But I did not, and there was nothing between me and that guy, but Dale believed it. And so he came home accusing me, and I was so angry at being accused, I ended up leaving in great anger. He didn't believe me about needing to leave, so I still have my car. And I just got my few things and I left and never went back. And I needed a place to stay again, so I stayed with my friend who was stripping. And at the time, there was some stuff being sold that was called Thai sticks. It was marijuana on sticks that had been apparently dipped in opium. I think that's how they described it. That came out of Thailand. That's why they were called Thai sticks. And I don't remember who was selling them. It might have been her boyfriend. And now that I knew he was really a secret agent and all this stuff, I didn't believe anything. And I made the mistake of thinking if a liar tells you something, it can't be true. I wasn't realizing that liars tell the truth a lot, and then they just lie whenever it's strategically helpful to them. They don't necessarily lie all the time, like the girl that I had known in Arapahoe High School. And so I thought, or at least I told myself, oh, that doesn't really have opium in it. He's just saying that so he'll get more money when he sells it. I think that was what I thought. And I bought a bunch of it. And I think it was the first time I remember ever buying marijuana. But I was really upset, really depressed. I was really depressed. Yet another romantic relationship, quote unquote romantic, had gone down the tubes. I didn't know where my life was going. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was just really, really feeling didn't want to be alive anymore and all that stuff. It was very, very depressed. And so I had smoked some of that, and it made me feel really happy. Did not occur to me it was because it really did have opium in it. I just thought it was really good weed. And I bought a bunch of it, or, whatever. I didn't have a huge amount of money, but I had some money, having a job and all. And I bought some, and it would have, if I would have kept it and kept smoking it, it probably would have lasted me a month or something. And anyhow, every time I smoked it, it made me feel really happy. And she was letting me sleep on her living room floor. And I would wake up every morning, and the first thought would be, oh, expletive deleted. I'm still alive. Every night when I went to bed, or went to sleep, I hoped that I would die. And I was always so disappointed to wake up in the morning. But then I would smoke this happy weed. I think I started calling it something like that. I would smoke my happy weed, and then I'd feel really good again. And not too long after that, I started having really strong delusions that I didn't realize were delusions. I started believing things that weren't true. It was just like, it was weird. It was, I just started living in a fantasy world in my mind about things. And this, at the same time, this stripper girl that I knew was trying to do little magic things to make money. She had a jar with pennies in it sitting in the living room. I wasn't into that, but she was into that. Anyway, long story short, I ended up just really kind of flipping out on the opium and getting my purse stolen from a taxi driver with all the rest of my tie sticks in it, as well as my address book. There's I don't know how many people I lost forever from losing that address book, but I guess that was God's will, so I'm fine with it. But yeah, a taxi driver dropped me off at the airport, and I said, please wait for me here. I just need to go make sure that so-and-so is there. And so-and-so, I didn't even hardly know her. It was somebody I had known in the ashram, and I had a delusion that she was arriving at the airport and that I was supposed to go meet her. It was just totally made up in my head. It was so weird. And so, but I asked him to wait for me in case I couldn't find her. And he was very reluctant. He wasn't going to do it. And I said, here, you keep my purse, and that way you know I'll come back. So that's how I got my purse stolen. He just left with my purse. And then when I came back out, I realized he'd left, and now I had no money, no purse, and another taxi driver said he'd help me find him. Instead, he took me to a motel. And after he got all undressed, I made a run for the door and got to run away, and hitchhiked back to. It must have been to her apartment. I don't know where else I. Yeah, hitchhiked. I made it back to her apartment by hitchhiking. But all the people that picked me up, they knew I was out of it, I'm sure, because I was just saying weird stuff like, you want to go to another planet? Because if you stay with me, we're going to end up on another planet. And I don't know, it's just weird. I wanted to eat some raw shrimp. And one guy went and took me somewhere where I was able to get some raw shrimp, and I was eating that. Ooh. And, anyway, I came back to her apartment. She wasn't, I don't know if she was there or not. And then my parents showed up. That was really unusual. They weren't really a part of my life most of the time. And it turns out that my stripper friend had called them because she was worried about me. And they came in, and I saw they were both wearing green, and I said, oh, you're about to come into money, because of my friend having had that green jar that was supposed to collect money. And I don't know what else I said to them, and my dad said, you're just speaking gibberish, and that made me feel very insulted. And I just left and started running. I just started running through all those rolling hills of all those apartments and ran away from them. And then I made it back over to the street that I could hitchhike, to go off somewhere else. And but before I did that, I had a feeling I should walk into this one apartment or whatever you called them where they were living there. It was somebody I didn't know, place I'd never been, and I just thought I was supposed to go in there. And sure enough, their door was unlocked and no one was home. And there was a big coffee table in front of their couch, and it had a great big clear bowl full of pennies. And for some reason, I was thinking of pennies as a bad thing. And so I picked up that bowl and went to the back of their apartment and opened a window and threw all the pennies out onto the yard. And then I went and put the clear bowl back, and then I left. That's all I did in that apartment. It's so weird. And of course, that got reported by those people when they came home, and of course they noticed right away that the pennies were gone, and probably pretty soon after that discovered they were all in their right behind their bedroom, and they decided not to press charges. And anyhow, all that had happened, and then so I've made it to the street to go hitchhiking, and a police car came up, and he stopped. And he said, I don't know, he was pretty nice to me. I don't remember what he asked me, and he said, well, your parents are worried about you, and they'd like you to consider staying at this place, and why don't I take you there, and we'll have you meet with your parents there. And he took me to a place that was like a mental hospital. And we met my parents there, and they were saying, look, we know you need a place to stay. I mean, that was what was on my mind. Where am I going to stay now? And I had a feeling about the mental hospital that it was neither good nor bad, so I wasn't really scared of going in there. And they said, yeah, you can come stay here, and you just have to sign these papers. It shows that if you incur I don't know if they even told me. I don't think they told me that it showed that I was the one responsible, because I was 21 by that point, and they just wanted to make sure they didn't have to pay for it. And so I signed all this stuff saying that I would pay for it, and I was entered into this mental hospital, and boy, it was so weird, because this was the first time I was off both the cocaine and the opium, and I didn't realize it. I thought it was very strange to realize that all that time I'd been snorting that cocaine, even though I didn't feel anything, it was making my body addicted. And so between that and all the opium I'd been smoking for maybe close to a week, maybe, I ended up having a whole withdrawals that there's at least a whole day I don't remember. I just don't remember it at all. And I was there, and I woke up in the mental hospital. I woke up in a bed, and my dad was sitting there. And I remember I was trying to think, and it was the most, what's the word? I never ever before or since found it so hard to think. It was true torment, trying to think, because it's kind of like if you have a thought, and you might go from point A to point B to point C being the end of the thought. And I would try to think, and I'd start at point A, and then I'd get to point B, and then it would split off two ways, and I didn't know which way to go. It was like one side was black and one other side was white, and I didn't know how to finish any thought. I couldn't finish a thought. I could only begin thoughts, and they kept splitting off. It was true mental torment. And this is what I was going through at the time I woke up and saw my dad. And He didn't say anything. I said to him, I said, "You were here with me during my darkest hour." Sounds melodramatic, but it really was a dark hour. And he didn't say anything. He didn't come see me again after that. And I was there for a little while and got to be friends with, I'll leave out all the little stories of being there, but it was mostly younger people. And one of the girls I met there, she had gotten brought there because she had gotten naked and crossed a major Broadway, major street in Denver, thinking that she was Eve. She was an atheist, but she thought she was Eve of Adam and Eve. And I don't know what drugs were involved before that or whatever. I have no idea, but that's how she got there. And I think she still kind of thought she was Eve. And, but, I didn't let that bother me. I mean, we could still be friends, even though I didn't think she was Eve. And anyhow, after not too long, maybe a week or so, and she was always talking crazy, she said, "I'm moving out today." I said, "Really? How did you get out?" Because it seemed like everybody was, staying a long time. But before I tell you about the getting out story, they were giving me drugs every day, and I didn't want to take the drugs. And she's the one who taught me how I could. You can't do this anymore. Everybody already knows that people used to do that. But back then, you could get away with putting the pills under your tongue, and drinking the water and pretending you swallowed it, and then later you could take it out and throw it away. And that's what I did. I didn't take the drugs they were giving me. And she's the one that taught me how to do that. That was pretty cool. So anyway, she was about to get out. I was like, "Well, how are you getting out?" And the psychiatrist, he only came by about once a week and talked you for, he talked to me, it seemed like, for 5 or 10 minutes. And, I'd tell him something, and I could tell that he was just shining me on. He didn't care what I thought. He didn't care who I was, and he just didn't care. That was just so clear. And so, but I thought, how do you ever get out with a psychiatrist like that? And who just lies to you and pretends he knows what you're talking about, because he really isn't even listening to what you're saying. But she said, that she pointed out this one particular guy that was one of the, I guess we thought of them as supervisors on the staff. And I didn't know him personally. I'd never talked to him, but I knew exactly who she meant. And he was a black guy. And she said, I told him that I was here because of black magic. And he made it so that they're letting me out. She said, "You ought to go have a talk with him privately and let him know that you're here because of black magic, and he'll let you out." And that's what I did. I got an appointment with him, and then I told him that I believed I was there because of black magic. And sure enough, he got it all worked out. I was able to get out. They wanted me to keep coming back at a day thing for weeks and weeks, but I couldn't do that because I couldn't do that and get a job. So I only did that until I was sure that I didn't legally have to keep coming. And as soon as the person who was kind of in charge of me at those group meetings told me the truth about that, then I made the decision I'm not coming back. And it kind of astounded me that all the other patients, the outpatients there that were coming to this, they were very fearful. They were like, "Oh, are you sure you're going to be all right? How are you going to be able to take care of yourself?" It was like, no, I was me. I had skills. I knew what to do. It was really sad to see how the people had identified themselves as people who could not cope with life. But I didn't feel that way, and a couple of the therapists argued with me, told me I should keep coming back, but I said, no, that's easy for you to say, you're getting paid to be here, but I'm not, and I've got to go to work. So that's how I got out of that mental hospital. And so when I got out of there, my parents didn't really want me to live at their house, because they had, I think maybe by that time they might have even had Heather. They might have had 2 little girls by that time. I'm not sure. I think so. And so they didn't really want me to come stay with them. And the mental hospital had some kind of halfway house that people could stay at for I don't know how long, probably a really long time. After moving out of there, that would, you had a TV and they would feed you, and there was, you had a bed and everything. And so I was taken to that place, and it was